Over the last decade or so, Capcom has gone from being a household name that genuinely represented quality gaming to being verbally pelted with garbage due to bad choices, right up there with EA and Activision. To say that Capcom has had it rough in this time is, well, it's a bit of an understatement. The company's penchant for piss-poor decisions began to infect it around the time of the launch of Devil May Cry 4, and from then onwards. It was a long and winding road for the company once referred to as the Cap God. Today on the Infinity Pixels, we're going to talk about the hard fall, occasional bright spots, and eventual revitalization of Capcom. There's quite a bit to discuss here, as we're going quite a ways back to see if we can pinpoint exactly when Capcom decided to hit the big red button labeled "fuck it," take that nosedive into the ground, and what has helped put them back on the right path. With all that being said, let's get started. Street Fighter, the once king of fighting games. Devil May Cry, the originator of the character action, stylish action games. Resident Evil, the godfather of survival horror. Breath of Fire, Power Stone, Darkstalkers, Marvel vs. Capcom, Monster Hunter World, Dead Rising, and so many more franchises that Capcom has under their belt. At one point, Capcom was a powerhouse in gaming. Much like seeing the EA logo, the Capcom logo once meant quality. It meant a genuine adventure that would either scare the hell out of you as the damn zombie dog jumped through the window, or have you throwing up your fist triumphantly as you beat your friend in that tiebreaker match of Street Fighter. But at some point, Capcom's ego just got too damn big, and they wanted more than they were willing to put in the work for. They got ridiculous with their DLC practices, outsourced almost everything in development, canceled title after title, including one big one which we'll get to later, and just continued to ride on the coattails of Street Fighter 4 through four iterations, charging people more and more each time. Capcom got greedy and wanted to maximize profits for as little work as possible, regardless of what the consumer wanted or how they felt. Let's jump into one of the bigger mistakes that the company has made in recent memory. And believe me, it's a doozy. On March 6th, 2012, Capcom released what should have been not only a smashing success, but also should have been one of the best fighting games ever, one of the biggest fighting games ever. Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Think about that. This was part of a 2-game deal where Capcom would develop Street Fighter Cross Tekken in the classic 2D Capcom fighting game style. Then Bandai Namco would take those characters and put them in a 3D, fully movable environment. It was a dream come true for a lot of fans because you were promised both styles of game, so that fans of both franchises could get what they want. Tekken fans got a Tekken game, and Street Fighter fans got a Street Fighter game. Well, as of recording this, it is June 19th, 2018. We still don't have Tekken Cross Street Fighter. We're worse off by what we ended up getting from Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Not only was the game broken by the gem system, matches lasted way too long, and so much more, there was one thing that really set people off for this game. On-disc DLC. Now, if you're confused by what this is, what it means is that the 12 characters that were set to be downloadable content in the fall of 2012 were already ready and playable on the disc at launch. They were just hidden. Yeah, they cut characters from the final launch of the game, left them on the disc, and held off so that people would pay extra for them later down the line. And these aren't small characters either. You had Blanca, Sakura, Brian, Dudley, some of the big characters for their respective franchises, and when Capcom pulled that stunt, it began to show people just how out of touch Capcom was with its audience, and frankly how little it actually cared about them. Not to mention that by this point it had been about, 4 years since the last Devil May Cry game? Okay, let's backtrack a second. You remember my point about Capcom outsourcing everything earlier? This is where it comes into play. After bouncing back from a rough drop in quality from Devil May Cry 2 with Devil May Cry 3, the anticipation for the fourth installment of the franchise was high. After a few very weird trailers that teased Dante as the main protagonist once again, it wasn't until 2006 when Nero was introduced and the new combat mechanics were shown off. Positive reception of the game itself led to relatively high expectations for the sales of this title. Devil May Cry 4 was expected to ship 1.8 million units by the end of its respective fiscal year, but by the end of February, the game had shipped 2 million copies. That's just its first month. Easily the fastest and best-selling game in the franchise. But that wasn't good enough for Capcom, as suits were enamored with the sales of other recent big titles, such as the near 5 million copies of Halo 3, Grand Theft Auto 4's 3.29 million, etc. Capcom wanted bigger and better, and they believed that Devil May Cry didn't sell as well as the previously mentioned titles because it wasn't as Western-friendly as those titles. Boy, were they wrong! Thus, we're brought to DMC, which, by all accounts, is a fun game. Sure, it's not really Devil May Cry, and I'd argue that if the name was taken off and it was something completely different, it would have had a much warmer reception. But the name of the game meant it was dead on arrival, and that was a big blow for Capcom. DMC's failure led them to pull the franchise from the spotlight for quite a while, 5 years, while they toiled away at a true successor to Devil May Cry 4 in hopes of gaining the fans back. While Capcom never gave specific sales numbers for the title, they did say that it sold well, but less than its predecessor Devil May Cry 4, which tells us a few things. 1. Devil May Cry 4 underperforming, and I use that term loosely, was not because the game was not Western enough. 2. Completely rebooting the franchise with this attempt was definitely not the best way to go about it. And 3. If nothing else, Capcom would at least take the aesthetics from this version of Devil May Cry to assist in building DMC 5. But that's a different video for a different time. Devil May Cry 4 was a huge turning point for Capcom in the negative fashion, while the bombing of DMC Devil May Cry helped push them back in the right direction as they would soon begin work on a true successor to Devil May Cry 4, aptly titled Devil May Cry V. Oh no, that's a 5. I could read Roman numerals, I swear. I played Final Fantasy. But that being said, there's probably one thing that the aptly named Crapcom did that really set people off. Yes, more than Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and yes, even more than Dante. Mega Man is iconic. There's no denying that the Blue Bomber is synonymous with Capcom and with 2D run-and-gun platformers in general. Whether it's classic Mega Man or Mega Man X, you know you're in for a good time. Most of the time. Not every game has been great, but that's not the discussion we're having right now. What needs to be talked about are the highly regarded and beloved Mega Man Legends games. The first launched on PlayStation in 1997 and on Nintendo in 2000 to some very positive critical reception, with the sequel getting even better reception than the first. People were praising its darker and deeper narrative, fine-tuned gameplay with more choices and just how involved the game was. It was a big deal considering it predated Ocarina of Time in Japan as a game that took a 2D franchise and pushed it into 3D with positive results. That being said, after 10 long years, Legends fans lost all hope of ever seeing Mega Man Volnut and his story ever being completed. Until September 29th, 2010, during a Nintendo press conference, Mega Man Legends 3 was finally announced for the 3DS. There was even going to be a full prologue game released on the eShop to keep people sated until the final game came out. But sadly, a mere 10 months later, on July 29th, 2011, Mega Man Legends 3 was cancelled. Fans were devastated, understandably. However, Capcom had yet to actually deliver the swift kick to the sack that broke the fans' trust in them. Capcom Europe's Twitter account actually stated that a lack of fan support and interest as the reason for the cancellation of Mega Man Legends 3. This was a real thing that actually happened. The blatant disrespect and disregard for not only the Mega Man community at large, but for fans of Capcom was unbelievable, and it was just a string of bad incidents following this that led to people turning away from them, denying them their money, because Capcom actively blamed the fans who had been begging and pleading for a sequel for a decade, saying that they didn't give enough support or show enough interest. But amongst all that vitriol and hatred for the company, something behind the scenes was brewing to help them gain back the fans they lost. I'm gonna skim over a few things to get to what I think is actually really important for this. Street Fighter V launched and it was a complete disaster. Now granted, it's in a much better state now, but honestly it's still only considered a mild success, and I'm sure the exclusivity really didn't help. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite launched and... well, that is just a whole other video if I'm being honest. Suffice it to say that if Street Fighter was a nightmare, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was the apocalypse. Capcom still obviously has issues with their fighting game development teams, and there's no denying that, but let's save that again for another video. The big four I'm referring to are as follows: Monster Hunter World, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, Resident Evil 2 Remake, and Devil May Cry 5. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard was announced at E3 2016 to much surprise with a January 24th, 2017 release date. The world was shocked as this looked nothing like the Resident Evil they were used to. It strayed far from the action-heavier titles of 4 through 6, but also seemed to stray away from the camera style and zombies of the original trilogy. Capcom was still in murky waters considering how poorly Resident Evil 6 was received and just the public's opinion of them in general. But little did the world know that Capcom had struck gold. Despite being called a PT clone, a copy of the first-person horror overflow we'd been having thanks to games like Amnesia and Outlast, Capcom had not only crafted something genuinely horrifying, but a genuine Resident Evil game. The exploration, the puzzle solving, the inventory management, the terrifying enemies, Resident Evil 7 had it all, and it was a smash hit. Capcom had breathed new life into a franchise thought dead after Resident Evil 6. This was the start of something good for Capcom, and this was how they could capitalize on the faith they had lost. At E3 2017, another big Capcom title was announced. This time, no release date. That came at Tokyo Game Show of the same year. This one was big. Monster Hunter was finally coming back from handhelds and onto the home consoles with Monster Hunter World. A seamless open map with no loading screens or areas such as in the handhelds, online play with up to 3 of your friends, new monster AI, new ways to interact with the environment, so much more. Monster Hunter World was a dream come true for fans of the franchise, and it proved to be a huge hit. With a simultaneous worldwide release, Monster Hunter World became the fastest-selling game in Capcom's history within just a few short weeks. As of March 2018, only 2 months after launch, it became their best-selling game with 7.9 million units shipped. They have continued to support the game with crossovers from various Capcom titles such as Street Fighter and Devil May Cry, as well as a PlayStation-exclusive crossover with Horizon Zero Dawn content. You can complete missions to make gear and weapons based on Aloy, Ryu, Sakura, Dante, and others. At E3 this past year, they announced a crossover with Final Fantasy XIV, where you will be able to take on, yes, the Behemoth, later this summer. Capcom has found themselves a hit, and they show no signs of stopping. They should be proud of what they accomplished with this one. However, it's next year's Devil May Cry 5 and Resident Evil 2 Remake that will really determine if they have truly learned the error of their ways. Both games being built on the RE engine, first utilized by Resident Evil 7, look stunning, and while Resident Evil 2 got gameplay at this year's E3, Devil May Cry won't get a hands-on until Gamescom later this year. Both games look absolutely stellar and show a genuine care from Capcom. Maybe it's still a business decision, but seeing the passion from creators like Hideaki Itsuno tells me that these are games that the developers and creators of Capcom want to make. Capcom could completely ruin this. Resident Evil 2 could come out and be full of microtransaction crap, while Devil May Cry 5 could come out and play like Devil May Cry 2, have a boring story, and so many other ways that it could go wrong. There are any number of things that could ruin the upward trend of goodwill that Capcom has brought themselves. That being said, I think many of us are starting to see now that they may have in fact learned their lesson. It may have taken them the better part of a decade to pull their head out of their ass and stop thinking that their shit doesn't stink, but if nothing else, they are getting back on the path that made them so beloved in the first place. Crafting epic adventures of every kind and innovating while doing it. What do you think? Is Capcom back in your good graces, or do you still loathe them for what they've done to some of their best franchise? Comment below and let me know. Let's talk about it. I want to know what you guys think as well. I know I missed some things like Mega Man 11, but this script was already really long and I didn't want to drag it on any longer than necessary. That being said, it does look great and I'm excited for it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video essay and are looking forward to the next one. This represents a strong shift in tone and content for my channel that takes a lot of time and effort, but I believe the upgrade in quality really shows for it. Thank you everybody for sticking around, and don't forget all the thumbs up, subscribe, and bell notification jazz. Until next time though, I'm out. Peace!